Okay, Father Ripperger returns to Avoiding Babylon. We only have 1 hour with Father tonight, so we're gonna try and jump right into stuff. But Rob, you have an ad read, right? You have to do real quick.
Yeah. So requisite sellers, and I'm
Mispronounced.
sure he's going to say I'm mispronouncing it. They are our sponsor once again, and they have a special Christ the King sale going on right now. For 20% off, you use code Rex Chalorum at checkout for 20% off, and you can go to requisitesellers.com. And we also have somewhere here we have a QR code you can scan too. So
You know what we should tell them? We should tell them to come up with a more complicated um code word to get their discount.
Yep.
Like if they could come up with something a little more difficult to spell, they might do better in sales. So guys, you got to be kidding me with Rex Calorum.
They asked if it was okay or if I wanted them to do based again. I'm like, we'll just use this.
Okay, so Father Ripperger, is it Ripperger or Ripperger? I have to settle this.
It's a hard G, so it's Ripperger.
I've been saying it correctly all these years, as everybody tells me I mispronounce it. So, okay, so Rob and I wanted to get you on because we've been seeing a lot of craziness in the culture lately, and specifically in the past like 6 weeks, starting with the shooting in Minnesota, and the shooting on the Catholic school, and some of the imagery that came from that shooter's manifesto, and the imagery on the guns and the bullets and stuff. And we were talking about how a lot of these people that have been committing these things are part of these like trans anarchist groups. And so I don't know if you, Rob, what are those groups actually called?
So I mean, there's like the Antifa sort that that the Charlie Kirk shooter was in, like the John Brown Guns Club, the Democrat Socialists of America, kind of your evolved versions of the old communist groups. But then you also have these more kind of satanic aligned accelerationist groups like the Order of Nine Angles, and I always get it wrong. It's either 746 or 764. But all these all these sorts of groups that were so many of these violent shooters have been in recently. The Colorado shooting that happened the same day as Charlie Kirk, the shooter there was in the Order of like Nine Angles group and stuff as well too. So
yeah, we were just kind of wondering if there was any kind of, just because I know everybody's going to try to associate the Charlie Kirk shooter being like demonically possessed, and I don't think you could say that. But the kid in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, there seemed to be, like, when we watched those videos, that kid really did seem to have some kind of demonic possession going on. Did you catch any of those videos?
I did a few of them. I think that okay, so let's just back up just a little bit. One of the patterns that you'll tend to see with people like this, there's actually two things that you see. The first is that demons can start working on somebody, especially like if somebody starts watching pornography or something like that. The demons can get their foot in the door, and then they start chiseling away at the person through diabolic obsession. And I think that's, if you look at the guy that shot Charlie Kirk, it looks like that he got involved in certain things, and then there was this quick deviation, which is a pattern that we regularly see, not when people are, in addition to people being possessed, but also people being diabolically obsessed. And I'm not suggesting that he necessarily is. It's hard to know without actually sitting down and talking to him and praying over him. But what happens is the demons start picking at the person, and then they psychologically work the person into a state where when it comes time to actually kill themselves or kill somebody else, the demon doesn't have to do a whole lot of work, because, in fact, he doesn't want to do a whole lot of work. He wants to get you worked up so that you make the choice, so that it's fully voluntary, and then you are the one that's culpable for having actually done that, although they will sometimes drive it as well. So it's not, and when they get to that stage, we call it little demon, big drama. The demons can drive it to such a point where they don't have to do a whole lot of work. They just have to go boop. And then what happens is once once the person gets to that state, the demon only has to do just a minor suggestion, and then boom, they'll go off and do some really bad stuff because they've worked themselves into that state or allowed themselves to get worked into that state. There's a second component that we're actually seeing with some of these guys, and you see this actually not just with Charlie Kirk's, but you see this with some of the other guys, and that is, did any of you guys ever listen to that conference I did called Malformed Consciences?
No, I didn't catch that one.
Probably.
Yeah, so basically this is the structure of how this works. What happens is St. Thomas talks about it in the context of question 153, Article 5 of the Secunda Secundae of the Summa Theologia. And in there, he talks about how the person starts out thinking that fornication is immoral, right? Or that certain things of impurity are immoral. But then Bessie Sue walks in, and she's so beautiful. The guy comes and says, okay, in this one instance, I'll do it. But then as he keeps falling over the course of time, so he goes from thinking it's immoral to actually thinking that, it's actually not bad, to actually it's actually good. And then once it becomes good, then anybody who attacks it or tells him he can't does it, they become the evil people. And so that's the progression you tend to see. Now, we saw that in our own culture. We actually saw that in our own culture in regard to fornication itself. The greatest generation was the ones that were fornicating behind the scenes and nobody knew, that were talking too much about it. There's all sorts of indicators of that. But that's why they didn't stop the boomers from openly doing it. So the boomers said, free love, this is all great, la da 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 da. And then, in the 90s and after, it became de rigueur, or it became the conventional wisdom that you should live together before you ever consider even getting married. And so when people suggest, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. Okay, the same thing, that same pattern happened in relationship to stuff like homosexuality, with transgenderism, with all this stuff. And so by the time we've gotten till now, these people we still have the natural inclination, even when our conscience is malformed like that or goes off like that, we still have an inclination to judge that things are right and wrong, but we end up judging the wrong things are right and the right things are wrong. And that's where we're actually at in the state of things right now. So between the demons, between people's intellectual depravity, intellectual formation getting to that point, and then the demons being in the mix, that's why we're seeing this stuff. That's my take on it.
So, okay. So now on top of that, we just watched the whole Charlie Kirk thing go down, and then a million different stories are coming out, and we're seeing so many of us are watching content, and this one's saying this doesn't add up, and you start getting all these conspiracy theories coming out. And for me specifically, like I am in such a state of cynicism at this point, from everything they did to us from COVID up until now. And then every single event, I'm just skeptical of every single narrative the government puts forth to us. Like what should someone like me who has no, because it seems to me like this is actually the point of what they're doing, like this fog of war, fifth generational warfare thing, where they just want to leave people in this perpetual state of untrust, like distrust of every authority figure.
It basically like saps your will to act, is what it seems, because you don't know what's real, what's not real, and it just seems so like diabolic in nature that for instance, like after the Charlie Kirk, there seemed to be a will to action of some sort to somehow correct the issues that are going on in our society. Yet, but within now 2.5 weeks, that will seems to have evaporated because of all the disinformation, misinformation stuff out there. No one knows what to believe or what to trust.
Yeah, I mean, there's two components to it. The first is that when we come up against an institution or an agency in the government or even in the news media where there's this chronic lying, it's chronic. They're caught over and over again. Appetitively, it gets to the point where we get burned, and so we get cynical, which is actually more appetitive than intellectual. The intellectual component should be doing what we would always do intellectually, is because it is possible that they actually tell something that's true. I actually talk about this in my book, Shock Talk, where there was this one story where this woman jumps off a bridge and kills herself because of this, and yet when the place I saw it was in the National Enquirer, and it was absolutely 100% true. Now the National Enquirer is completely unreliable, right?
Yeah.
So what it does is it conditions people to intellectually stop analyzing things in relationship to what they can know as truth and the degrees of certitude. In other words, when the news media tells us something, like, and I took this basic approach to what's going on in Ukraine and Russian war. I mean, the more I read and the more I'm getting a better sense of it. But in the end, the two agencies that have been habitually lying to us are the ones telling us what's going on over there. Okay, so that tells me there's a war probably going on. There's probably stuff going on. Who's winning and who's not and who's all that. I don't have certitude because the sources I can't trust. Now, that doesn't mean that and because the sources themselves are unreliable. So what does this actually mean? It means that what they're really trying to do is get people to the point where they're following this distrust to such a degree that that intellectually, even when the truth is then finally told to them, they don't believe it.
Yeah.
And so and then from there they can continue manipulating people, because as long as you have intellectual clarity. So what is our approach to it? It has to be, well, truth is the adequation of intellect with thing. And so we have to always try and go back to what's the reality of this situation. If I don't have immediate connection to the reality, then whatever is the medium of that information determines the degree of certitude that I have. So, okay, there might be something going on, but in the end, I don't know. If it's something that's important, I'll investigate and look and get to a certain degree, but I'll try and achieve the knowledge to it to the degree that I can. And that means that I also don't necessarily dismiss every single source. I just have to verify everything is what it really boils down to.
Can I ask a question, Father?
Yeah.
I believe it was Rahm Emanuel who coined the phrase, never let a crisis go to waste. Of course, we all know at the very end where everything is headed with the Antichrist. All events obviously point to one end throughout world history. Don't let anything go to waste. How much of that do you think the enemy plans a lot of the trauma, yet then comes out with the solution? And how is that connected to do the demons do that as well in our in our intellect? I'm just asking it with the correlation between the two.
Oh yeah, they do. The demons do this all the time. In fact, it's a diabolic tactic. In fact, it was basically the demons that taught it to the communists and taught it to the. I mean, not necessarily by actual divination, but by suggestion, and even to Saul Alinsky, where you create the problem and then you step in as if you're the solution to the problem. And the thing is that part of that is that you see this where it's, and this is something which I started noticing the pattern with Obama. Was the same pattern that I actually saw in cases of possession, where it's just one bomb after another. And you never once you start to get to the point where you think you're going to recover from this and get a semblance of normalcy, they drop the next bomb, and it just keeps, so it's constantly keeping you off kilter, and you can't really get any semblance of normalcy. And then from there, then they can step in and say, see, if you would just do what we tell you, then this would all stop, right? And so that it comes from the diabolic, but that's just, that's what it tells us is that we're living in the middle of a communist playbook, literally right now, as this stuff just keeps happening.
When we see similar things like that happen in the church, I mean, does that tell us that those same forces are at work in the church as they are in politics?
Well, I mean, if the sources that have been, if the sources are actually accurate, yeah, we do know that these same types of things have been going on in the church actually since the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I mean, they've been actually going on. There is if you actually look at what happened in the 60s and 70s, that was in the church. I think for me that the situation in the church is a much more complex thing. There's very good evidence, at least of Bella Dodd, who gave congressional testimonies to be believed, is that the communists infiltrated the church. The Freemasons had been openly talking about infiltrating the church. And then on top of that, you had the moral collapse in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And this is why in 1960, the Congregation of Religious puts out a letter, Institutio Religiosorum, saying stop ordaining the homosexuals and pedophiles. So that had already infiltrated. So now what we have is in the church, it seems to me, is that it's more complex, but you still see those same dynamics that are actually happening. It's the same playbook. I also gave a conference, if people want to listen to it, where I talk about what we're seeing in the world always is predated as happening in the church 10 to 20 years before that. It's already been happening in the church. And so what we're seeing in the world has already been happening in the church. And so as a result of that, that's why the graces aren't flowing to the world. And that's why we see the specific things. In fact, I show that the specific problems in the church result in those exact same specific problems happening in the world.
I went back and listened to your Generational Spirits conference today, and I was listening to you. You basically start at the lost generation, and you talk about how it all started with like this effeminacy that kind of crept in, where the earlier generations would suffer but never talk about it. And then as you got on, then you'd start getting the later generations would then nonstop be complaining about it. And by the time you get to the millennials, it's narcissism that's crept in. Okay. And this talk you gave like 7 years ago, and now that we've had a little bit of time to see Gen Z play out, do you have any other insights about Gen Z? I know you made a very, very accurate prediction towards the end of that, and listening to it this morning, it was like 7 years ago. I was like, wow, that kind of came to fruition, didn't it?
Yeah, the prediction I said is that the sixth generation, which is actually from the lost generation, the sixth generation, which is Gen Z, would actually be involved in the occult. So what we're seeing now among that generation is a bifurcation of that generation, a pretty serious bifurcation, so that you see people in that generation, there's a percentage of them that are actually involved in the occult. Mm-hmm. In fact, even the Satanists have said that their recruiting efforts in that generation is like they have like a 15-fold increase in the number of people coming in from that generation than they did in the past, something to that effect. But then the other part of that is people realizing, okay, wait a minute, this is all evil. I mean, because if people act according to natural virtue, they see this evil stuff happening. They're like, that's not right. And then we're seeing, which I didn't really necessarily see, which is because I just saw that given way the generations were declining, that the occult activity was going to be the part. They're going to be pagans, basically. Mm-hmm. And then actually worshiping demons, etc., which which a large percentage of them are. And then the other percentage, though, is then now converting to Christianity or trying to live a Catholic or a Christian faith. And so that bifurcation is something I didn't see, but I did see the first part of the occult activity.
It's like it's basically like religion was inevitable, and they tried to push this materialist worldview for so long, and now we're actually seeing the ends of that, which there is no such thing as just a materialist worldview. Like the Enlightenment is falling apart, right. And you're seeing the younger generation is going for like some kind of spirituality, whether that's these pagan things, which is why they're always trying to like make like trans sacred. You see, they put halos around George Floyd and stuff right. like that. Like it's like this instinct. And even what you're seeing happen with Charlie Kirk, where you're seeing how intuitive Catholicism is. Like they want to put his image on coins, and they want to venerate him as we would a Catholic saint, but they have no category for it almost. And then but then you also have the other side of that, which is some of the younger generation is not just going for Christianity in general. They're going for traditional forms of Christianity, right? They want something transcendent. So they are going to Orthodoxy, or they're going to traditional Catholicism. And you kind of have a hierarchy in place right now from that time period you're talking about before, the 70s and the 80s. And they're so out of sync with what's going on in the culture right now that they can't see these kids want something the culture can't offer them. Like, they're all so desensitized from their stupid screens and the digital world. So they want to go find something transcendent. And the hierarchy is just trying to take that out. I don't understand what their actual motivations could possibly be.
Well, actually, for me, the hierarchy is there's two components to it. The first is many of the people, not all of them, but many of the people in the hierarchy were from the very generation and part of the very generation that said, that rebelled against authority. They just categorically, they didn't follow liturgical laws. They didn't follow their bishops. They didn't do everything. They rejected, they were dissenting on everything. And then when they got into positions of power, now they're just dictatorial. But the point is that that was the generation that did that. And then what did they do? That's what they taught the younger generation. And then now they're mystified that the younger generation is like, well, I don't want to listen to you then. I don't have to listen to you, even though you're the authority. I don't have to listen to you. I'm going to go do my own thing. So they created this very problem that they actually had done. But the other side of it, I think, too, has to do with the fact that they can't understand, because the boomer generation, which we were kind of talking about before, but the boomer generation is their generational spirit is indocility through intemperance. And so as a result of that, they're very much mired down in this world. And so when they see a younger generation not wanting a liturgy that doesn't give them that it doesn't indulge their appetites or doesn't appeal to them or doesn't, it doesn't speak to them per se, they just want to worship God or what have you. They don't quite actually understand that. And I think the other part of it is too, is that then this is the third part, a third part, I should say. The natural law, St. Thomas says, that the natural law commands all of the virtues. Now, that basically means that the natural law envisions and encompasses all the virtues. So one of the virtues is the virtue of justice, by which we render someone their due. And the sub-virtue to that is the virtue of religion and relationship to God. These kids still have an inclination to religion. This is why this is why these people with malformed consciences are putting the halos on. But on the other hand, the people that are trying to actually truly seek the good, that's why they're actually going to something that will fulfill that inclination of the natural law. And what they're finding is that what was ushered in by the generations before us, who basically wanted to throw off everything that was traditional and all of that, they wanted to get rid of it. But the younger kids, they never had it. They never had that fulfillment. So now they're seeking it.
Yeah, it's I mean, for anybody like my age and younger, I mean, I think I'm on the older end of that spectrum now, like an older millennial. But there was something about being like brought up in the happy clappy the world of Novus Ordo Catholicism that you just to get something a little more serious was such a snap into reality, right? Like it was this feeling of, man, I have been robbed of my birthright. And to finally be exposed to something like that was such a culture shock. And I see it as, I mean, I see there's a bishop in, man, I forgot where it was, maybe Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, one of the bishops talking about how, he's going to put this whole project forth to try and get kids to come back to mass who haven't been to mass. And it's like, you see this hunger amongst the younger generation for something spectacular and transcendent, and the connection, it just isn't there for them. And I don't know. I try to give as much charity to them as I can, but it's just bizarre to me that they don't see that the younger generation is the reason there's so many converts to Catholicism right now, and this younger generation is coming in, is because they don't want like the thing that the culture offers them. They want something so like countercultural, and for us, countercultural is tradition. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, well, and I think it really just boils down to is one of the reasons why that we saw mass exodus from the church is the reason we saw mass exodus from the church originally is precisely because of the fact that people's natural inclinations for actually serving God and worshiping God were not being properly fulfilled. They just up and left. If If you're going to present to me a liturgy, or you're going to present to me a way of living a Catholic life, or a way of living a Christian life, which is just going to appeal to my emotions and make me feel good, well, then that what you're telling me is that the primary principle is feeling good. Well, I can get that from watching porn or something else.
Yeah.
And so the kids went that direction, or a lot of them got sucked in, or it was kind of that period where people, or the world itself, even technology, can provide you stuff that's far more entertaining than what's going to be in that. And so, but that is like everything else, though. Once if you sit down and eat an entire box of chocolate, at the end of it, you're just like, right? Well, that's where the kids are at. They want something else that's actually going to fulfill them on an ongoing and on a deeper level, rather than just making them feel good.
What do you think? Because I think a lot of people have this nostalgic view of what a trad looks like, and they kind of look back to the you have the trad that's been presented to everybody, especially through like podcasting and things like that, where they have the pipe and the suit and things like that. But there's something like inauthentic about that. Like how can we bring this onto our children and make it authentic? Like what do you think the trad culture should look like? Is it any different from what it looked like in the past? Because the world is very different now, right? It's not the same world it was back in the 50s and 60s before the council. So like I'm trying to figure out like what a future.
Are you
trad
trying to get
movement-
permission to not wear a suit?
Well, that especially, but like an authentic presentation of
trying to get
traditional
permission not to wear a dress at mass. Okay, so here's the basic point of being a traditionalist, and this is where people, and actually this is, and we talk about traditionalism, but ultimately this is just Catholic. It basically means that we accept the principles and teachings that have been taught from the time of Christ on, developed and perfected in their understanding through the course of centuries by the saints and by the theologians and by the church and its declarations, etc. We accept all those principles and teachings from the tradition. That's what we receive. The problem with the quote greatest generation is that there was a theological idea, actually it was a philosophical idea, which actually came from Hegel, which is, you go from the thesis to the antithesis to the synthesis, and you can never go back to the original thesis, right? So that generation actually believed that in the passing of the tradition, it was impossible to pass on the tradition intact without modifying it through this process to the next generation, and that each generation changed the tradition and passed it on to those after them. That flooded their mind. That's why they don't think you can ever go back. Well, the question isn't going back to living like the Amish, or walking around with grease in our hair like they did in the 50s and things of that sort. That's not what we're actually talking about. Although if you want to do that, that's fine. The point being is that it's the belief in those principles and the adherence to the tradition and the teachings and the principles of the tradition, and then applying them in our own concrete life. The definition of prudence is applying the principles of right action in the concrete circumstances. And so we have to know how to apply those principles of what the church has always taught, and pass it on intact without a change. That's why St. Paul says, I passed on what was given to me, right? Not me changing it, but I passed on what was given to me. And then we live that, we accept it and we live it. And that basically means the moral principles, the spiritual principles, and all those things. And they're just going to be, those principles are going to be, there's two kinds of principles. There's those that apply everywhere in all circumstances, like do good and avoid evil. But then there's certain principles that are applied mediating the circumstances. And it's our current living circumstances that tell us, okay, this means that because I live in the modern world, then I'm going to have to apply these principles of prudence in this way, in these circumstances, and not try and apply it like they did in the 1950s, because the circumstances are different. It doesn't, and by the way, the 50s had its own sets of problems. But the point being is that it's a matter of applying the right principles, both spiritual and theological and moral, in our current living situation. God put us here. He wants us to apply them. And so that's what we need to do.
We're in a time like especially since the election of Leo, like been trying to just make sense of everything we went through the past 10 years. And then we had Pope Leo kind of came out with a squishy statement on the seepage situation today. Now I kind of like, especially listening to your generational spirits talk today, I kind of equate that with like boomer Catholicism, what Leo did today. Like Leo, I don't think Leo was trying to, I think he was just afraid to offend. And it kind of reminded me of like the person who's at like, don't bring politics and religion up at the dinner table because it might cause a stir. And that's kind of how I'm making sense of, you know, the past two pontificates. And I don't see how to see things unless we are in the passion of the church right now. Like, and I mean like the actual passion of the church, where when you see Christ at the pillar after he's scourged, you would never think that's the Messiah, but that is the Messiah. And like, it's kind of tricky to convince people that the church being presented to us by the hierarchy is the church right now, but it is the church. Do you have an apocalyptic view of what's going on right now? Or do you think we're just in kind of a type of something, and then we're going to come through this and something else will come after?
Well, I mean, we are going through a passion of the church in a sense, right? I mean, obviously, and right, like for example, the fact that the church is being stripped of its property, it's just like Christ was stripped. You know, the fact that there was this intellectual suffering that the church actually went through, which is basically the heresy of modernism. I think there's all sorts of comparisons, not that those are necessarily the only ones, but there's, I think, comparisons. So I do think that we are going through a time that is very, very difficult and very rough for the church. I also, I mean, people disagree with me here and there, but it seems to me that Our Lady at La Salette already laid it out. She said, look, you're going to go through a chastisement. And I think what we're seeing now is the spiritual precursors to that before the real physical spanking starts, right? Which is, I think, is coming. But then it's after that she said, and then there'll be 25 years of good harvest, and then the man of perdition arrives. So she already laid out the timeline at La Salette. So I think we're about to go through some very horrific things, and I also think that the church herself is going to continue to decline significantly. Frankly, I think it's going to continue to decline until we're actually all spanked. And then after that, I think Our Lady will have the reign of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The graces will finally flow, and people will finally actually have clarity, because it's only through grace that they're going to have clarity. And this is the thing that when I look at a lot of the people in the hierarchy, and I see that they don't talk with clarity, they don't talk with conviction or authority, as they used to talk about how Christ talked with authority. Basically, what does that mean? It means somebody who actually had the right to speak on a particular topic, and they did it with conviction. You just don't see that. It's all because of the fact that they don't have the grace to do so. Because without that grace, I just don't see people doing it.
I got a question, Father. You mentioned the hierarchy and needed to do what they need to do. We saw very recently, you also talked about Gen Z being more into the occult, and we saw recently increase of asking witches for curses. Do you think that these curses that these witches are putting through would have less effect if the hierarchy did what they were supposed to do? Is there a correlation there?
No, not necessarily, because the efficacy of a curse is based primarily on two components. It's the same thing that determines merit in relationship to our own prayers. First, in relationship to merit, you have to be in the state of grace. So how holy you are determines how efficacious your prayer is going to be. And then the nature of the actual prayer that you say. Those are the two primary components that are going to determine it. In the case of the witches, it's how evil the person is. That is, how much they're in the camp of the diabolic, knowingly. And then that's why I've talked about this in the past, but there's 3 tiers of witches. There's the low-level witches, they just dabble, they're not very efficacious. And there's the middle tier, they have some kind of a success, but it's the top tier that when they do their stuff, because the witchcraft has been in their families literally for hundreds of years, these people know this stuff because I've come across a couple of them, and I've come across a couple of their writings. These people know this almost the same type of material that I know as an exorcist. They know they're getting demons involved. They know how this stuff actually works. And so those people don't get involved for curses for hire, because they know that they can become subject to the curse themselves. That's why they don't get involved in it. Okay, so all that being said, I think that in relationship to Charlie Kirk, I think the demons were involved, but I'm personally don't think we have the certitude, because God, nothing that somebody does on the side of good, even in relationship to our own prayers, that if we pray, whether God answers it or not is entirely at his discretion, even though he generally listens to us. But on the side of the evil, it's also the same thing. It's based on his permissive will of God. And so I don't think that because God determines how much influence the demons can actually have and when they can actually influence people. And so when I looked at the whole Charlie Kirk thing, I saw Diabolic, but as to the overall structure of the evil, not necessarily in the curse actually driving this particular individual to do a specific thing, even though I think demons could have driven him to that point. The point being is that I don't think we have certitude that the curses that these witches did actually caused the problem. I think it could be one element. It might have been the actual cause, but we just don't have certitude. And I tend to kind of doubt it. And I'm one of these guys that deals with demons every day. So it's not like I don't believe stuff.
Do you think there's a correlation between the church no longer performing Eucharistic processions and like our grand liturgies and things like that, and like so after the council the church kind of stops doing those things, adoration kind of slows down? Do you think the church stopping those things has allowed the demonic in the world to just kind of run roughshod over the world because the church herself is no longer performing her ritual duties like they were before?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly the cause. And the resulting factor of that is that lay people are less holy. And so when they pray and when they're praying and doing certain things, there's just the efficacy of their prayer just isn't as strong as it used to be.
Yeah. Before we get to super chats, we're going to get to super chats. I want to ask you kind of a personal question here. So Rob and I do this show 2 times a week, and like we're trying to keep it like lighthearted and have like fun conversations and stuff. But I've gotten 2 fraternal corrections in the past couple of weeks. One of them was from a family member, and another was from somebody I care very much about their opinion. But knowing where the line is between humor and going too far when doing a show like this, because I'm so desensitized from like part of my job is to look on the internet for stuff to talk about, and I'm constantly scrolling on Twitter and things like that. And there's kind of like this irony poisoning in the air right now from especially like the younger generation's humor that we were starting our show off with a funny video, and I had somebody reach out to me and say, you went too far with this. This was an inappropriate joke. And like, I don't want to turn people off that might stumble across our show for the first time. And then that's kind of what they see when we do delve into deeper things like we're having to talk about tonight. Like, how do we deal with just the desensitization and knowing where the line is? And I don't know if you kind of get, it's not a
I kind
bottled
of get it. I mean,
question.
obviously something that just has to do with basic modesty. You just have to make sure the proper decorum is observed, even when you're joking. I mean, I think jokes and playing videos that are funny can be legitimate as well. The other thing that you have to be careful of, and it's a sin against justice, which is derision, where you're deriding people through that. So, and this is something which, even as an exorcist, when you're dealing with demons, you can't call them names, because then you start lowering yourself. You can't deride them, because then you start lowering yourself to their kinds of behavior. So you just have to kind of avoid those things. So as long as it's in congruity with modesty and things of that sort, I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah, it's like the comment court jester at the foot of the cross was thrown at me, and it's like, I know we're talking about serious things, but I'm trying. We want to make sure that people don't lose their joy of being Catholic, right? But then there is because a lot of the media we all consume lately and for the past decade, specifically with Francis, was just so, like, everything was so negative. It was like, oh, this scandal happened, this scandal happened, this scandal happened. So it really is this thing where Rob and I are trying to thread this element of like having humor and not crossing that line, but also still bringing Christ to people. I mean, Rob asked me to be godfather to his son, and I went out to Minnesota this past weekend, and we got to meet a couple of people who like were very touched by what Rob and I do. And it's like, I know kind of what we're doing is important. It's a difficult thing to make sure you're still bringing the light of Christ to people, but be normal and not cross the line, but still be humorous. Right. It's a tricky thing that we're trying to do here.
Yeah,
not trying to be overly complicated.
Basically, what you're telling me is that in order to be online and not get yourself in trouble, you have to have a certain level of virtue.
Yeah.
In all virtues, in all the areas, right? Because humor does play a proper role in people who are humorless. I mean, even the saints, like Saint Philip Neri said, he wouldn't even consider someone for his religious order if they didn't have a sense of humor. He just kick them out, right? So there does have to be a certain sense of humor because it's actually in humor that you can actually see the truth of it, because humor is based in incongruity between what we know it should be and what we're seeing. And so it's based in the truth, if it's true humor. And so it can actually play a role. And it can also lighten things up a little bit when it gets too heavy. It's just that you just have to be careful that it doesn't detract from your gravitas, from your seriousness.
Yeah. All right, Rob, let's jump to some super chats. We only got Father for another 20 minutes.
Before we do that,
local show.
Before we do that, do we want to let Enoch talk about his newest album?
You have a new album?
Yeah, yes, I do, Father. Actually, I use your name on one of the first track, the intro track. I'll send it to you.
Was it in vain?
I'll send it to you after this. No, of course not. It's everywhere to be streamed. But if half of the people that are watching right now go on iTunes and download it, I think that'll propel me up to the top 10. We'll get back into the charts because we got to the top 20 in iTunes in the against all these Protestants. I'm one of the very few Catholics that actually hits the charts when this comes out, thanks to you guys. So yeah, if you guys want to go download it, please do. It's an entire apologetics album, 11 tracks.
I think a fair case could be made. It's a mortal sin if you guys don't download this album.
And there the joke maybe goes.
All right, see, I crossed the line. And no, Taffy, you're not fired. I promise. We're still gonna use Taffy videos. All right, Rob, what do we got on the super chat line?
Okay, let's see here. So someone did pay $19.99. They're the email that that was sent to me here. So give me a second here.
All right, while Rob's pulling that up, what is this? Let's see. Bro, sorry I missed you. Minnesota nephew got baptized and was nuts with all our kids together. If I'm in New York, Minnesota again, I'll hit you up. What do we got here? For Father, I heard Aquinas's view on heaven is that you can't have any inordinate attachments or else you'll need purgatory. Is doing and growing in prayer, the sacraments, and virtue sure means to order our attachments in a right manner?
Yes, because technically speaking, the only thing that you can have any attachment to in heaven is God. Even all the other people that are in heaven and all the things that are in heaven to which we take joy in and we have delight in, it's because we see God in them. So ultimately, it's only about God. And so if we have any attachment to any creature, now there's two kinds of attachments. There are orderly attachments to creatures. For example, people who are married in the beginning stages, there should be some level of attachment, unless you're perfect spiritually when you get married, which most people aren't. People go through the natural attachments, but eventually those should seed to have becoming perfectly detached so that you can actually love the person purely from charity's sake, rather than just a natural love. So which I talk about in a couple of different places. But so in heaven, that's correct. In the end, even the lower faculties, our emotions, but then also our wills have to have perfect rectitude. And that rectitude can come only if these things are ordered to God they're ordered to God. And so if there's anything that is inordinate in relationship to it, it's time to spend time in purgatory.
Yeah, I think a lot of Catholics get this this idea of, as long as I stay in a state of grace, I'm good. I'll make it to purgatory and I'll deal with it there. But I don't think any of us should be striving for purgatory. So,
yeah, no, you should be striving for heaven.
Yeah. Robbie, got the email pulled up?
Yeah. So it says in the deliverance prayer book, Father Ripperger addressed prayers that can be prayed to remove any demonic activity that would keep family members from converting and coming to the church. He said this prayer was vital, especially if you wanted them to receive last rites. Where can these prayers be found in the deliverance prayer book?
The principle, well, the one is consecration of exterior goods to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Consecrate the person, or also that you want to convert, or that you want to come back into the church, or what have you. But then the other prayer is it's called the Latin form of the binding prayer, but you can just use the English translation for it. And then what you do is you just use that, which I think is on page 13 or thereabout, or something like that. I know that the consecration of exterior goods is on page 44. But if you look at that prayer, and you just put it, you just say, any spirit that's keeping my father, for example, my father from seeing a priest or from coming back into the church, I bind you in the name of Jesus, etc. And then you say the prayer. So if you start saying that on a somewhat regular basis, people have had phenomenal success.
Okay. Does one have to worry about spirits from the sixth commandment attached after confessing and repenting from those sins?
Okay, so there are two aspects. This is actually a really good question. There are two aspects of sin. The one is the culpability, which is in the will. So the blame, which is in the will. And so when you go to confession, so let's just back up and talk a little bit about sin. When you commit a sin, your will chooses the sin, which means it attaches itself, or it fixes itself to the evil that's actually present, right? And so it binds itself to that in the process of the choice. When you go to absolution, which literally means to dissolve the bonds of, it dissolves that bond of the blame in relationship to that attachment that your will now has to that. It doesn't mean, here I'm not talking about attachments in the second. You still have residual inclinations in the will. It's called malice as a result of that. But here we're talking about it absolves the bond of the sin. Okay. That and if you're very penitent and that type of thing, it can also remove what's called the temporal punishment due to sin. These are the effects of the sin. Every time you commit a sin, there's a series of cascading effects in your faculties. So, for example, if you committed a sin against the sixth commandment, not only does your will choose it, but now you move the lower faculties to take delight in it, and now they have these inclinations, and this is why people struggle in relationship to those things. But then also, if you like, for example, if you did certain things in relationship to you opened up the door to the diabolic, they get their foot in the door. The confession may or may not absolve that bond that the demon actually has in relationship to you. He could still be attached to you as a result of that, as a temporal punishment due to sin. We see this actually playing itself out. Dr. Dan Schneider is just about to come out with a phenomenally good book where he traces this through all of Scripture and through the fathers of the church and how this actually plays itself out. So there's this effect of sin. So when you go to confession, in most cases, you're going to have to work on breaking those other attachments or breaking those things in relationship to those. In other words, you have temporal punishment due to sin, and you've got to make up for it. That's part of the reason why you do penance.
Well, you before we get to the next question, you gave a talk one time, and you were talking about how pornography and sexual impurity is something like trads really struggle with, and then Trent Horn came out with a video about saying how like this was the dark secret of the trad movement. And I'm like, I was so mad at him when he did that, because I'm saying like, yeah, I do think that definitely is a thing in the trad movement that men are struggling with. And I think when you were talking about it, you were basically like convicting your own, right? Like talking amongst your own. And it's like, we got to make sure I worry about my own. And there was this the way he worded it made it seem like that sin only exists in the trad movement. And I'm like,
well, he's obviously never heard confessions. In fact, in having heard hearing confessions of new right people, even though I always give the old right formula, hearing new right people and old right formula, you hear it both. But my point was to point out is that the trads suffer from this. It's not something that's just isolated to them, but the new right people suffer from it. The other thing is that trads actually confess it.
That's what I.
A lot of the new right people don't think it's that big of a sin, or they're even told by priests, "Oh, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it." Right, and so they don't even confess it.
Yeah. That was what I took away from it. I said, well, maybe the dark secret in the you know, in your typical parish is that confession isn't talked about enough, and maybe sin isn't talked about enough, and maybe that's the problem here, that, you know, these things need to be discussed more. This is an interesting one. Why do popes make so many bad decisions when they have hundreds of thousands of masses said for them daily? Also, really, that one is kind of obvious because we're all fallen, but you might have a better answer. But what did Christ mean by the gates of hell will not prevail? It seems like a goalpost change.
Well, theologically, when they say that the gates of hell will not prevail against it, it means that all of the essential elements of the church will always remain intact until the end. You will always have a visible hierarchy. You will always have a visible church. You will always have a pope in each generation. You will always have a hierarchy. You will always have the church sanctifying people in the sacraments, etc. Those things will always be present, and that's what it means when it will not. And it also means that it will not fall into error in the sense of the pope will never formally or infallibly define something. If he uses his infallibility, he's not going to fall into error. So there's that element too. So that's basically what it means. It doesn't mean that we're not going to. I mean, I don't understand why people find this situation such rocket science, because look at St. Peter. You know, Christ had to tell him, "Hey, you love me," 3 times to get him to make restitution for the fact that he denied him. And then you also had all the other apostles fled and abandoned him. You had so it wasn't until, and this is what most people don't realize, is that it wasn't until Pentecost that the apostles were confirmed in grace and didn't sin after that. So up until then, they were just, and so Christ allowed these things specifically to happen. He actually even allows Peter to initially not so much fall into error, but not judge the truth of the situation regarding circumcision until St. Paul comes in. And then once he actually uses his office, then he makes the right decision. So everything we're seeing playing itself out now played itself out in Scripture. I mean, we've seen it.
Yeah, you see everything typologically. This is an interesting one. So our friend Mike Pantile, he's got tattoos all over him, and when he was leaving mass, he goes to an FSSP parish. I think his priest pulled him aside and, you know, got on him for his tattoos, and then decommissioned his tattoos. Can only an exorcist decommission a tattoo? Should people decommission their tattoos if they have them? Like, what is that? What is there anything we could?
Yeah, any priest can decommission a tattoo. Any priest can. They can actually contact me if they want to. We're going to probably put it out at some point, but it's a modified form of the reconciliation of a church that's been violated. It's a modified form of that, because your body is a temple to our Lord. So it's kind of a overcoming the violation that's actually occurred. Should they actually do it? Yes, they should. I always take a lot of heat for the whole tattoo question, but the fact of the matter is that both as to historically, see, today everybody's doing it, so they don't think it's an issue. And then, of course, you have the catechism come out and says, well, you know, as long as it's not. But if you actually look at the tradition of the church, from up until the 50s, it was very clear that the only people who pierced and tattooed were people of ill repute. I mean, you just didn't do that type of thing because it was considered mutilation. And again, I always get people saying, oh, it's not mutilation. It's not. We're not talking about it's mutilation comes from Latin mutar, which means to change. You're changing something about it. Okay, so all that being said, too, if you actually look at this thing at the microscopic level, it's pretty ugly. But anyway, that all being said, they should actually decommission their tattoos. From an exorcist point of view, the primary thing that we see is that demons view a tattoo as their brand. If they were the ones that incited you to get it, it's their brand on you. So if you decommission it, they consider it almost like theft, taking something from them, and they will fight. Some of the most brutal times I've seen people suffer is when we've decommissioned tattoos.
What about the Jerusalem cross that people would get when they went to Jerusalem on pilgrimage? Like during the Crusades, I think they would get them. That's how long that tradition's been around, where they would get the Jerusalem cross on their forearm or something like that.
And there's other instances too, because people have actually brought them up. It's the fact that these particular things were not paid attention to or tolerated in the church doesn't necessarily mean that they were in congruity with the proper theology.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Somebody's asking if is there value in saying the rosary in Latin from memory if I'm not fluent? I still read meditations on mysteries in English and love the prayers in Latin, but sometimes I feel more removed from the meaning.
Yes, in the sense of I mean, obviously the principal thing that you want to have is devotion in relationship to any of those vocal prayers. So it's devotion is the primary thing. So if you find that you're going to be more devout saying it in English, then it's probably going to be more efficacious. However, objectively speaking, here we're talking objectively speaking, saying the rosary in Latin is actually going to be more efficacious because of the fact that Latin is a sacred language.
I always kind of like if I had difficulty meditating on the mysteries, because sometimes I pray my rosary when I'm driving into work, and sometimes I can't do the best mental prayer. But for me, saying the rosary was always about having a relationship with Our Lady.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was always the important part of it. Even if my mental prayer wasn't the greatest during the rosary, it was more just about having like a deep relationship with Our Lady and having that help me fall deeper in love with her.
Yeah, and there's different levels actually in relationship to the rosary, right? I mean, you can basically be focusing on the Hail Mary as you're saying it, but the idea is you're actually supposed to be meditating on the specific mysteries, and then the Hail Mary that's being said in the background isn't necessarily where your focus is, and that's kind of the higher form. So I find saying the rosary in Latin actually easier to focus on the mysteries rather than English, because English tends to distract me a little bit more than the Latin does.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Can you recommend any your favorite source for people just getting into mental prayer?
The easiest thing that you can probably do is you can actually download it online. There's a thing on mental prayer by St. Francis de Sales online. You can read it. It's like 13, 17 pages around there, depending on how you print it out. If you're looking for something more extensive, The Ways of Mental Prayer by Lahodi, that's put out by TAN.
Okay. And what do you think about Eastern Orthodox exorcisms?
You mean the Orthodox? Well, okay. So it's very similar. It's a little bit different from Protestants. Okay, so Christ said, by my name you'll cast out demons, right? But he did not say, by my name you'll cast out all demons. Now, what that basically means is that the efficacy of an exorcism is based on three things. The first is the prayer itself. What prayer you're saying, the prayer itself is going to have a force of its own in relationship to it. And that's why the Protestants using Christ's name can have a certain amount of success. There's times when we would get people showing up on our doorstep that are Protestants who their Protestant ministers couldn't get the demons out of them. Right. And
the original Exorcist movie was based on a Lutheran who eventually had to go to a Catholic priest.
Yeah, exactly. The second component is the person who actually does the exorcism. So the holier the priest is, the faster it's going to actually occur as a general rule. But also the fact that he's a priest itself has a force of its own. And one of the ways I've seen this the most marked is every time I've seen a bishop do an exorcism, it's on a completely different level than when you see a priest doing it, right?
Yeah.
And then the third part is the actual jurisdiction of the church, the authority of the church. And this is why sometimes the Protestants have to come to us. So the Eastern Orthodox, they wouldn't have the jurisdiction. They do have jurisdiction to hear confessions because Paul VI gave it to him, which I don't think he should have. That's my own personal opinion. But but they don't have the jurisdiction to actually be doing because they don't have, they only have material apostolic succession, not formal apostolic succession. And so as a result, they don't have the jurisdiction passing from generation to generation. So they don't have that side of it. So I think that they're more efficacious than the Protestants, but not as efficacious as the Roman or as the Catholics who are in union with Rome.
How do you charitably decline a wedding invitation to a Catholic getting married outside the church?
Just tell them, look, I'm not going to participate in your future fornication and sin and sort of.
I've had success with like my in-laws and stuff by just saying, look, I don't make the rules of the church, but I'm a loyal son of the church. I have to follow, I'm a son under authority and I have to do what I'm told.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the best ways. The biggest problem that you find in this area is that they can go to any priest who will say, "Oh, yeah, you should go for charity's
Yeah.
sake." That's where the problems always begin. Whereas the church has been very clear, no, you can't even have passive participation in those. So, in fact, there's an article by, I don't know if you've seen it, it's called Worship with Non-Catholics by Craig Allen. And he actually wrote this thing because he got sick and tired of being asked about this question, right? So, but in there, the church says, no, you can't go to them. So, but as far as the excuse goes, I think it's just on an ad hoc basis. But other than that, in the end, I think they got to do exactly that, Anthony. I think in the end, that's what they got to do.
Guys, no more super chats because we got to get Father out of here. Okay, so there's two more I want to definitely get to. This one, does the hierarchy structure exist within siblings, older to younger siblings, or are each equal? Does it matter which sex of the individual, oldest son, etc.?
According to the natural law, as it was understood from the very beginning, you actually see this playing itself out even in Scripture, is that the oldest son had certain rights or claim to certain rights by the natural law. So, and then it goes down the sons. So then it goes sons, and then the daughters are separate from that. So the first son is the one that always was considered to have. This is one of the reasons why, for example, if a woman's father dies, it's the oldest son, if he's of age, whose obligation it is to protect her honor and say yes or no to this proper suitor. So it does actually follow that according to the natural law.
And then this one for sure, I wanted to, man, we could probably do a whole show on this. What are your thoughts on Holzhauer's 7 epochs is it 7 epochs, right, of the church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably an entire episode on that.
Well, first of all, I haven't studied as closely as I would like to be able to speak intelligently on it. But second of all, I tend not to follow those things too closely.
Well, what do you make of apparition chasing? Like, do you see a danger in that? Because that's also something I see a lot of Catholics doing, where they want to analyze every single apparition ever, and and then you kind of get into this apocalyptic mindset. We always see you're studying every event like that. Is that curiosity that people are dealing with there?
Yeah, historically, the authors always said that was a result of a lack of faith, right? I mean, because ultimately, we already have a general sense of what's going to happen because Christ told us, but we should also have faith in Christ, and that there are certain things that we don't need to see these things, because what they're really doing is they're trying to pursue something in a supernatural life in some fashion, rather than just leaving the ordinary grind that a Catholic should leave in order to become holy. And so I think that's, in fact, it's what's kind of ironic is if you see a lot of the saints that had a lot of these apparitions, they didn't go around looking for them. Right. They just wanted to live their life. And so, but I do think it's actually very problematic. I think it is rooted in curiosity, a lot of it, but I think a lot of it is also just a lack of faith, because they want a security or certitude in relationship to what they believe and the satisfaction they get in that certitude when they hear these things.
All right. We're going to let you go, Father. For anybody wondering, like, Enoch gets us these Father Ripperger interviews. So, like, we are forever in debt to him for introducing us to Father and convincing him to come on. Yeah, Father, we love when you come on, man. Everybody always loves to get to hear from you, and you've been pretty silent for the past couple of months, so it was great to. I see you making I saw you do a couple of interviews. I caught, especially. With
I had a family emergency I had to tend to for quite a while, and it's starting to taper off. So now I got more time, and so you'll see me start being out there again.
If you have anything you ever want to promote, please give us a shout. We'll always help you with anything. We appreciate you coming on. We're going to stay on for locals. We'll let you go. Enoch, you're going to stick around, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Father, thank you so much. And we will.
You guys want a blessing before I leave?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, super vos et manet semper. Amen. All right. God bless you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Father.
Okay. We're going to head over to locals. If you guys are not local subscribers, please come over there. That's where you want to subscribe.
Give me a minute. I can get Taffy's video
you guys want
set
to play
up for locals.
Yeah. So that's what I kind of want to talk about over there. Like, we're still going to do taffy intros for everybody that's worried we're not doing taffy intros. We're still going to. It's just I think we do have to be a little cautious how we go about it, because yeah, like the idea of like somebody coming in and checking out our show for the first time and coming across something like we did, like you know, we'll explain it on the other side what some of the more offensive stuff was, and then we'll talk about Pope Leo. We'll talk about these comments Pope Leo made. Yeah, it looks like Tradink's got a little life left in him maybe now with Leo.
Do you want the King of the Hill or the Kevin James one?
Do the Kevin James one. The reason I didn't want to start with the Kevin James one with Father Ripperger tonight is because we did the Kevin James joke the last time he was on, and I don't want it to just be the Kevin James thing every single time he comes on. It's like,
okay, let me.
So we'll go with the Kevin James one. If you guys aren't subscribed, please subscribe to Locals. It's where we have all our fun. Yeah, I got some stuff we could talk about over there.
Okay,
so it's just a fun time.
Loading the video now, so give it 15 seconds.
Let me see what else we got. We got oh, I forgot to get to the other questions. Oh crap. Sorry for my friends that asked me to ask stuff. Yeah, I want to get into the Charlotte thing. And then
I want to. So when we were together this weekend,
we have stories to tell. That's right.
But walking on the steps of the cathedral, you and Nicole were about to tell us how gay Minnesota was compared to New York, but you never actually got around to that story.
Holy cow! Not even that. It was like we have stories to tell. That's right. We saw each other. There's a bunch of stuff we could talk about.
Beef tongue.
Yeah, I tried beef tongue for the first time. Yeah.
Okay, I have the video ready. So this is going to be
all right. We're heading over to Locals. If you guys are not subscribed, you're losing out. You're missing out on the best part of the show.
Let me share the Locals.
Share the Locals
link here real quick.
Pay for the Kevin James story again. What a ripoff.
You love it and you know it.
What is Locals? Locals is the after show. We do an after show. So every if you guys are just checking us out for the first time, we do a 2-hour show on Tuesday and Thursday night. We do an hour on YouTube, and then we jump over to Locals for the second hour. And we do a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. And wait, Kevin James is Catholic? Yeah, we'll get into Enoch too. We'll see how he got us our interview. And okay, you ready or what?
Ready? Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, let's go. We'll see you guys on the other side.
I had no idea that Kevin James was such a devout Catholic. He's known for his roles in King of Queens, Grown Ups, and Paul Blart Mall Cop, and a bunch of other things. What first alerted me to Kevin James being Catholic was this picture I saw on X of him as an altar server in a traditional Latin Mass, with Father Chad Ripperger serving as the priest. We've also seen photos from a 2019 Catholic retreat with Kevin James, Chad Ripperger, Scott Hahn, and a whole host of other attendees, both clergy and laity.
I gotta say the taffy intro this week wasn't the greatest, and I didn't make him redo it. And we'll play it on Locals.
He did tell us he was going to be too busy today to actually.
Yeah, so like we'll get Kevin James on, and then everybody will want to talk to us. That's how it's gonna go.
Kevin James is Catholic?
I just heard that. It's so crazy. Somebody just mentioned that Kevin James is Catholic, and I can't get over it. It's wild.
Next, you're going to tell me like Rob Schneider's Catholic too, or something.
Rob Schneider's Catholic?
By the way, I couldn't be more confused myself right now.
What does he do? Why are you keeping us off